Hey, good morning, folks. It's Pastor Stephen back again with another No Frills daily devotional. And today's topic is not so great expectations. And what got me thinking about this video today was actually a previous episode that I did titled The Illusion of Progress. And I've been talking about process and trusting God with the pieces of my life and trusting God with the mess that I've created with my life and how that can be hard. It can be hard to trust God with the process because sometimes we're not seeing the progress that we want to see. All right. And so in that previous episode, The Illusion of Progress, I was kind of teasing out this idea that sometimes we miss progress. We miss progress because we're looking for the wrong thing or we're looking in the wrong place for it. And it's this idea that we want to see what we want to see, okay? And that can limit our perspective and our perception of whether or not God is making any progress with what I'm trusting him with. But that's silly because he's God, right? He's God. Why shouldn't I be able to trust him? And he's good, so why shouldn't I be able to trust him? And he loves me, and so why shouldn't I be able to trust him? But the reality is, I struggle with trusting him. And so today we're going to talk about not so great expectations and how that plays into us missing God's progress in our lives. And so I'm going to take you to the text. I'm going to take you to John, actually, today. We're going to backtrack a little bit from First Peter, and we're going to go into John. And I'm going to read to you John chapter 5, verses 39 through 40, because I don't know if you know this or not, but Jesus dealt with people constantly being frustrated with him, constantly feeling like he's not delivering, right? He was the Messiah. He was the promised Messiah, and people were constantly frustrated with him because of something called expectations. All right. And so I better take you to the text. Otherwise I'm going to start rambling. All right. And so this is John chapter 5. I'm going to read verses 39 through 40 because Jesus has been doing something that people thought he shouldn't be doing. He was healing on the Sabbath again. Okay. And you're not supposed to be working on the Sabbath, Jesus. Don't you know that? And so what are you doing healing on the Sabbath? And so he's being interrogated by these Pharisees. Now, if you don't know what a Pharisee is, a Pharisee was like a priest or like a teacher, like a Bible teacher back in Jesus's era, right? And so they were these Jewish leaders who they spent their time studying this thing, the Bible, okay? But their version of the Bible. The scriptures would have been in scrolls and stuff like that. You don't need to know all that right now. But anyway, and so these guys spent their time, their profession was to study the Bible and then to teach the Bible. And Jesus was constantly coming into conflict with these characters, right? And so listen to what Jesus says to them. He says this to them. He says, "You diligently study the scriptures because you think that by them you possess eternal life. These are the scriptures that testify about me." Or in one version, it says, "These scriptures point to me. They point to me. Yet you refuse to come to me to have eternal life." And a lot of times when I read the Bible growing up, I would always ask this, like, how could the Pharisees miss the fact that Jesus was God? How could they miss the fact time and time again that he was the trusted Messiah? They questioned it all the way through his existence here on earth. And even after he left earth, they still questioned whether or not he was the Messiah. And I think, how could they miss that? Like, he was right there, plain as day, right in front of their faces. And how could they miss that? But the reality is, we miss it too. We do, because we miss God's work in our lives. To ask that question, like, how could the Pharisees miss the fact that Jesus is the Messiah, is to ask the same question, how is it that I can, time and time again, miss God's work in my life? And it comes down to expectations. expectations, and expectations can be a bad thing. All right. And that's what I want to talk about today, is this idea that expectations, but why is that expectations can be a bad thing? Because they keep us looking for what we want God to do. When the Pharisees were questioning whether Jesus was the Messiah, it was because they wanted him to overthrow the Roman government. And they wanted him and them to become the rulers of the world. But that wasn't God's plan. And because their expectations didn't line up with God's plan, they missed the Messiah. And we do that in our lives. It keeps us looking for what we want God to do in our lives. And when we're looking for what we want God to do, and that doesn't mesh with his plan of what he wants to do in our lives, we're going to miss him. They limit our response. Expectations limit our response when God doesn't deliver the way that we think he should. Because he's always working. He's always working in our lives, okay? And so when we're looking for a specific way that we think he should deliver, okay, it's gonna limit our response. We're gonna miss miracles in our lives that he's doing on a daily basis because we're looking for a certain specific delivery, all right? Expectations lead to anger and frustration, okay? That's going to be the byproduct of expectations. When we place expectations on God and what we think he should do, they're going to lead to anger and frustration with God, okay? And if you find yourself frustrated with God in your situation, okay, and your experience, it has nothing to do with what God is doing in your situation, okay, or your experience, but rather it has everything to do with what you think he should be doing in your situation and your experience, all right? And ultimately, expectations. I've talked about this in a previous episode titled Hope's Nemesis, but expectations fuel disappointment, okay? They fuel our disappointment, which ultimately is the enemy of our hope. And when we start to lose hope, we start to lose sight of who God is and who he is for us and who we are in him. And so what we've got to do is we've got to learn to stop placing our expectations on God and what we think he should be doing in our lives. We've got to be willing to trust him with the process of our lives. And when we do that, when we take away our expectations and give him our trust, we're going to start to see the progress that he's been making all along. Hey, you guys, have an awesome day.